Hi everybody, welcome back to my channel. Today I want to talk about another version of pyramidology, which is the claim that the speed of light is encoded into the pyramid in some way, shape, or form. Uh, if you saw part one, I went into the use of the number 43,200 to come up with the circumference of the Earth and a few other equations. This one I wanted to look into specifically one. There's two versions. Primarily, this one has to do with the latitude of the location of the Great Pyramid. I decided to use this one because it's much easier to go through, and it'll segue into something I really want to cover in depth, which is the use of the metric system and how that is actually a problem. The other version of the speed of light, I printed that out. It's like 55 pages, and right now I'm sure nobody wants to watch me try and read and stumble through that. If I get 1,000 subscribers one day, maybe I'll do it, but for now, not really. Also, please excuse my neighbor's wind chimes. You might be able to hear in the background. I do have to do this on the porch because I can't do it inside. There's too many people roaming around watching TV, and the cats are going to bother me constantly. So let's get into it. So this comes in recently. I saw this and I looked into it, and what it says is the exact latitude of the Great Pyramid. Those numbers match exactly the speed of light in meters per second. And if you look at it, that's very interesting because that is the exact latitude of the Great Pyramid, and that is the speed of light in meters per second. So, with this, we want to ask a couple questions and see if we can break it down. Now, I've seen people talk about this and they say, well, there's 20,000 latitude lines that go through the pyramid. That isn't really relevant. You don't need to break it down that hard. This is the latitude given by Google Earth if you look it up. So that's the number we're going to use. So like I said, very interesting. So let's ask a question. Is it possible that the ancient Egyptians knew the exact latitude that they put the Great Pyramid on? And the answer is yes, they very well could have. The use of latitude in navigation goes well into antiquity. It was the way to navigate. Goes back even further, possibly an Ice Age civilization that was seafaring. And the way it works is you have lines that go across the Earth, starting at the equator and going all the way up to the pole and in the other direction. If you look at the stars, it's done celestially. There's a star at the North Pole that doesn't move as the Earth spins around. And if you take the angle on the horizon of that star, it's pretty well going to show you your position in the north or south. And the way they would do it is if you knew the latitude line that your destination was on, then you would sail your boat to that line and then directly over, and eventually you would hit it. And it was done that way for thousands upon thousands of years. Even though the ancient Greeks had a concept of longitude, nobody could figure out how to make it work. They couldn't get it right until the 1700s when mobile accurate chronometers were invented. So yes, absolutely, they could have known the latitude line. So next, would they have been able to calculate the exact latitude line to this precise number? And for that, we'll say maybe. We don't know exactly how accurate they could get with these latitudes, but it isn't out of the question, provided that their equator was 0 and the North Pole was 90 or vice versa. So the question really becomes, would they have known the speed of light in meters per second? And the answer to that realistically is no. And here's where I want to get into this. So meters, the metric system, is a modern way of doing measurement. It was invented in the late 1700s in France, and then it was spread throughout. So before that, there really was no concept of the metric system. It's very accurate, and it's in multiples of 10, and they devised it by a certain distance from the equator to a certain point, and then dividing it by 1,000,000. So that's modern. But what is the purpose of measuring something? You want to assign a numerical value to a length, a width, a distance, a volume, or a weight. And by establishing a numerical value, you can then do calculations, or either to make uniform stones for a building, to see how far away something is, how long it's going to take you to get there, measurement of valuables, how much is your gold worth by how much it weighs. So standardized measurements are actually integral to any civilization. So what we're going to do, for the sake of argument, is we're going to do the amount of distance that light travels in 1 second. And it is constant. It is the same distance. And what we're going to do is provide 3 different measurements. You got modern metric, which is meters per second. You've got feet per second, the English version or imperial. And then I found it, you can get it in Egyptian cubits per second. Now, even though all 3 of these things are for the same distance, they have radically different values. So when you're assigning a number to calculate distance, in this case of the speed of light, if you know exactly how many meters light travels in 1 second, you can calculate distance to astronomical bodies. You can calculate how long it would take you to get there at the speed of light. So this numerical value is important. However, it is dependent on which unit of measurement you decide to use to measure anything that gives you the numerical value for your calculations. And they're not interchangeable. You cannot use the amount of feet that light travels in a second. You cannot use that number to establish how many kilometers it is from here to Alpha Centauri. You have to convert the feet to kilometers, okay? So, like I said, metric is the modern measurement version. It's only been around for about 300 years. Feet goes back way into antiquity, about 2500 BC, and it was usually based on somebody's actual foot. However, the modern English system is based on King Henry I's foot. They took that and divided it by 12, and you have the foot. And then the cubit goes back even further into antiquity, so far that in the Bible, Noah used the cubit to build his ark. Moses used the cubit to build the Ark of the Covenant, and that was from your elbow to the tip of your finger. But it did get standardized by the Egyptians and other civilizations. So, that being said, why does this cause a problem? Because if you do not have the concept of one over the other, and you try, it will cause an issue. So I'll give an example of how this can, the 2 different values for the same thing will cause problems. And the first one example I want to give is a kind of a funny and expensive issue, and that is in 1999, they launched the Mars Climate Orbiter, and it cost about $125 million. Actually, they launched it in 1998, but in 1999, it got to Mars, and they were getting ready to celebrate that it was going to go in and assume its position, and it hit the Martian atmosphere and it burned up. And nobody knows why, and they had to look into it. And I'm going to read you exactly what they found happen. A NASA review board found that the problem was in the software controlling the orbiter's thrusters. The software calculated the force that the thrusters needed to exert in pounds of force. A second piece of code that read this data assumed it was in the metric, newtons per square meter. During the design phase, the propulsion engineers at Lockheed Martin in Colorado expressed force in pounds. However, it was standard practice to convert to metric units for space missions. Engineers at NASA's JPL assumed that the conversions had been made. The navigation mishap pushed the spacecraft dangerously close to the planet's atmosphere, where it presumably burned and broke into pieces. Okay, so what happened is they programmed it in feet, in English, but the calculations were all done in meters, and nobody converted it. So the spacecraft thought, I'm doing it one way, so here are my numbers, but they were two different systems. They weren't converted. Here's another way that not knowing two different systems will get you into trouble. In North America, in the United States, we're on the English system. So when you travel down the highway, your speed limits are in miles per hour. But in Canada, they're on the metric system. So their speed limit signs are in kilometers per hour. If you're unaware, as an American, that these are in kilometers, you cross the border and you see that first sign that says 100 on the side of the road, if you hit the gas to go to 100 miles an hour, you're going to a Canadian jail. Conversely, if you're Canadian used to kilometers and you don't know that the US is in English, and you go down the highway and you see a speed limit sign that says 70, so you go 70 kilometers an hour, you are going to learn all the latest American swear words because they're not the same. 100 kilometers an hour is actually 60 miles an hour, and whereas 70 kilometers an hour is much slower than 70 miles per hour. You see what I'm saying? So while these are all numerical values of the same thing, they're not the same as far as calculations. So what is the issue? The issue is that the speed of light given is in the modern metric meters per second. Okay? The Egyptians had no concept of the metric system. There is no evidence of the metric system being used in antiquity. It is not documented. Nobody wrote about any sacred measuring systems. It doesn't show up. However, they did write about the cubit. They used the cubit. You can go into the English Museum and you can see a cubit stick. Okay? So they would not have known that number. If they knew the speed of light, it would have been in cubits, their measuring system. Doesn't matter. If a lost ancient civilization had our version of the metric system, it probably would have been passed on, especially if the Egyptians were aware of it. And I've made this argument before. The Egyptians were highly precise people, and they loved doing their math in multiples of 10. If they knew about a measurement system that was highly precise and was easy to do in tens, they would have used it. They would have wrote about it. They didn't. So it stands to reason that anything in pyramidology that uses modern metric to get these conclusions is way off base. They would not have used it. Now, if you're into pyramidology and you want to find these things, or you believe these things are encoded, my suggestion to you is that you use the cubit system. Don't use any modern systems. Use the ancient Egyptian systems, because it is entirely possible that there is information encoded in, but it wouldn't be in something they had no concept of, and nobody around them had any concept of. You want to stick to cubits. I gave you the speed of light in cubits. You can use that to your own end and try and figure it out. If you can do that, you're going to get my attention, and possibly the attention of actual academics in the field. So anyway, that's all I have to say about that. I encourage anybody who wants to make a comment to put a comment in. If enough questions or comments come up, eventually I'll do a video to try and answer them. Or if you can prove me wrong, I will definitely do a video saying how wrong I am. Other than that, I really, really appreciate everybody stopping by the porch. Sorry about the wind chimes. Please like, subscribe, leave a comment, leave a hateful comment. It doesn't bother me. I love all of it. So until next time, thank you very much for stopping by.